I stood outside the warm glow of their house, music, laughter, and the clink of wine glasses behind frosted windows, while I stared at the message my son had sent me that morning. "It's probably best if you rest this year, Dad. These parties might be too much for you." I read it twice, then 3 times, and still it didn't feel real. Not because of the words, but because of who they came from. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. My name is Stephen. I'm 65. Retired. Widower. I used to teach English literature and believed in dignity, kindness, and the power of tradition. One of those traditions was Christmas dinner. I hosted it for decades. Even after Martha passed, I kept the fire burning, the turkey, the lights, the smell of cinnamon and roasted chestnuts. It was all mine until they took it away with one message. I never thought I'd be uninvited to Christmas by my own son, Daniel, my only child. The boy I raised with gentle hands and firm values. The boy who used to leave me crayon drawings saying, "Best dad ever." Now he had a wife. And everything changed the day she entered our lives. Victoria. The perfect banker. The sharp-suited porcelain smile who always looked at me like I was some outdated appliance in her marble kitchen. She was the kind of person who shook hands at family gatherings, who arranged flowers by color code, who said things like networking circle and legacy branding over champagne. She never liked me. And to be honest, I never pretended to like her either. I could see it in her cold little gestures. The way she sat across the room during visits. The way she picked up the wine glass immediately after I spoke. And now, this year, she had won. Because Daniel didn't just forget to invite me. He chose not to. That message was carefully written. Too carefully. It was Victoria's language. Too much for you. What does that even mean? Was I too much? Or just too much for her designer holiday dinner with the socialites of her inner circle? I spent Christmas Eve alone. I made tea. I lit a candle. I ate leftover chicken from the fridge. The silence was deeper than I expected. But not painful. Just hollow. Direct hit. Would you have accepted this quietly, or said something? What would you do if your own son excluded you from Christmas? Let us know in the comments. Later that night, I walked over to the old bookshelf in my study. Behind Martha's favorite Dickens collection, there was a dusty red folder. A legal document I hadn't touched in 12 years. My will. They had no idea. Not Victoria. Not even Daniel. That I had inherited a second property and a large bond from my father 5 years after retirement. I never mentioned it. I never needed to. But now I was starting to think it was time I did something with it. I sat down, opened the folder, and picked up my pen. If I wasn't welcome at their table, then they wouldn't be welcome at mine. And that was only the beginning. They say holidays are a time for reflection. That year, it was all I had. The day after Christmas, I woke up to silence. No laughter. No dishes clinking. No smell of leftover pie. Just the sound of wind brushing against the empty window panes. I sat by the fireplace where no fire burned, and I thought about how we got here. How did my son go from hugging me with jelly-stained hands to letting someone else decide I wasn't welcome at his table? Daniel wasn't always like this. He used to call me every Sunday. Used to ask about books. Ask about Mum. He was kind, thoughtful, and warm. We built treehouses. Collected stamps. Watched corny action films. He cried when I dropped him off at university. He promised to visit every weekend. He almost did too. Until she arrived. Victoria. I remember the first time she came to dinner. She brought a bottle of white wine and a bouquet of white lilies. She shook my hand like I was a stranger. Not too firm. Not too soft. Calculated. She smiled with her mouth. Not her eyes. And when I served the soup, she asked if it was gluten-free. That was my introduction to her. Everything was a transaction. Every word was a negotiation. I wasn't her father-in-law. I was a variable in her long-term financial plan. At first I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Martha would have wanted that. She believed in grace. But grace needs soil to grow in. And Victoria's world was polished concrete. As months became years, I saw the subtle war she was winning. Daniel stopped dropping by. He began dressing like a man he wasn't. He started using terms like strategic leverage and public image. He once told me he needed to think about how we're perceived as a couple. Who was we? And who exactly was watching? My visits grew shorter, then less frequent, then rare. I stopped bringing desserts. They stopped offering chairs. This wasn't about one Christmas dinner. It was about a slow erasure, a rewriting of our history, with me as a footnote. That morning, after I reread the message, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt a quiet click inside me, like a lock turning. I pulled the red folder from the shelf. My will. 12 years untouched. Still under my name. Still heavy with decisions made when Martha was alive. But life had changed. And so would my legacy. You see, years ago, my father left me a second home in Sussex and a portfolio of industrial bonds. Back then I never mentioned it to Daniel. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I never thought money would ever come between us. And now, that silence was my strongest asset. I spent the day reviewing papers, calling my attorney, setting meetings, updating names, changing clauses, removing shared access, transferring real estate under private trusts. Every pen stroke felt like a brick being lifted off my chest. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was clarity. Victoria wanted society. Daniel wanted approval. Let them have both. What they would no longer have was me. They didn't need my stories, or my laughter, or my traditions. And now, they wouldn't have my house, my accounts, my name in their plan. I wasn't bitter. I was awake. And being awake felt powerful. The next morning I received a family photo in the group chat. Victoria had shared it. She was wearing a sparkling green dress. Daniel had a wine glass in hand. Behind them stood her family. The caption read, "Our Christmas royalty." No mention of me. No question of my absence. No regret. And all I could do was smile. Because the game had just begun. There is something deeply satisfying about secrets. Not the kind that hurt people, but the kind that wait in silence until the moment they're needed. Like an ace in a worn deck of cards. I had kept mine for over a decade. The property in Sussex was modest on the outside but solid in value. It had been my father's last gift to me. He believed in preparation. In quiet strength. The bonds had matured slowly, steadily. No bells, no headlines, just quiet worth. And for years I saw no need to speak of it. When Martha passed, I set everything aside. Grief made money feel meaningless. And Daniel was still Daniel back then. Still my boy. Still calling on Sundays. Still sitting across from me drinking tea from mugs his mother bought on sale at the market. But time isn't always kind. Sometimes it erodes the very hands you once held. Now, in the echo of a Christmas I wasn't welcome at. That quiet wealth became something else. A tool. Not of punishment, but of redirection. Direct. Hit. What would you do if you had a hidden fortune and were quietly pushed aside? Would you speak up, or would you wait? I met with my attorney in his quiet corner office downtown. A man I trusted. Old school. Paper folders. Ink pens. No nonsense. I told him I wanted to restructure the will. But more than that, I wanted to insulate everything. I wanted ownership shielded from public exposure. I wanted full control of access. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The paperwork took hours. New trusts. Beneficiary removals. Name transfers. Silent shields. In short, I made sure that no one, absolutely no one, could touch what I had not explicitly left them. My name, my home, my savings. Everything was now threaded into a legal web only I understood. And Victoria, she would never see it coming. She thought she understood wealth. Thought her corner office and tailored blazers made her powerful. But real power doesn't shout. It signs documents. I passed by Daniel's office that week. I didn't go in. Just stood across the street. He looked older, tired, pressed. He was not the man I raised. He was someone Victoria was shaping, like stone under water pressure. Smooth on the outside, but reshaped underneath. I almost felt pity. But pity is a dangerous distraction. A few days later, I received a handwritten holiday card in the mail. From an old student of mine. Someone who remembered a lecture on Shakespeare and dignity. He wrote, "You taught us that silence is sometimes the loudest answer." And that line, it stayed with me. Because I hadn't yelled. I hadn't complained. I hadn't begged for a seat at the table. I had simply rewritten the table's ownership. Victoria, in her champagne-smiled glory, still posted her polished dinners and charity events, still curated a life of angles and filters. She believed she was winning, but she didn't know the wine she was sipping was paid for by the man she excluded. And tomorrow, she'd find out just how expensive that exclusion really was. The letter arrived at their doorstep the next morning. In it were just 3 words written in ink and power, effective immediately. Vacate. The wind had changed. I could feel it in my bones. The same way sailors once sensed the storm long before clouds formed. But this wasn't rain or thunder. This was the quiet crack of a carefully built image coming undone. The letter reached them on a Tuesday. Delivered by hand. Signed with ink older than their marriage. Victoria must have opened it in her usual silk robe with her coffee warm and her confidence warmer. She probably smiled at first. She always smiled before reading, as if life was already in her favor. But that day, her smile would not survive the second paragraph. I didn't need to be there to see it. I could imagine it. The tightening of her jaw, the glance toward Daniel, the sudden questions, the rising pitch in her voice. The letter was simple. 3 sentences. Legally sound. Delivered with precision. All previous beneficiary designations have been revoked. All access to the Highgate property is hereby terminated. Legal transfer of ownership has been filed under Trust Stephen Ellsworth, 1979. Victoria called me that afternoon. Twice. I didn't answer. She followed with a message. "Stephen, there seems to be some confusion. Perhaps we can meet to discuss." There was no confusion. Only clarity. For once. I sat in my study reading the same line in an old poetry book. "Pride goeth before destruction." How fitting. I made tea. I stared at the phone as it lit up again. Daniel this time. I almost picked up. Almost. But then I remembered the message from Christmas week. "Maybe this year you should rest, Dad. These parties might be too much." Rest. They had asked me to rest. Now they were wide awake. Later that evening, my lawyer forwarded me an email Victoria had sent. Long. Composed. Structured like a presentation. She used phrases like miscommunication, emotional consequence, family cohesion. She even added a line. "Of course we had no idea about your father's estate. We assumed everything was part of joint family planning." Assumed. That word. How powerful it becomes when it collapses an entire tower. I read the message twice. Then hit delete. Daniel tried once more. Left a voicemail. His voice cracked halfway through. Said he missed me. Said he was sorry. Said maybe things got overcomplicated. I heard the echo of my own younger voice in him. Back when life was still about stamps and treehouses. It ached somewhere deep. But not enough to reverse anything. This wasn't just about property or paper. It was about dignity. About drawing a line in salt and watching the sea finally respect the shore. I went for a walk that night. The street was quiet. Houses glowed with soft lights. Laughter spilled out from open windows. I was alone. But not lonely. I passed by a neighbor's house. Their young daughter waved at me through the window. Her smile was wide, unfiltered. She didn't know who I was. But she smiled anyway. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. They wanted me to rest. And so I did. With the peace that only comes when you stop chasing the chair at someone else's table. And start building your own. The silence broke 3 days later. Not with a phone call. Not with a knock on my door. But with a notification from my attorney's office. The documents had been received. Signed. Stamped. Recorded. The house. My house. Would be vacated within 72 hours. They had lived in it for years. Used my furniture. My kitchen. My memories. They hung their wedding photo in the hallway where Martha's used to be. They changed the curtains. Painted the guest room. But the deed had never changed hands. Because some people forget that kindness is not the same as surrender. Victoria called again. This time her voice was different. No velvet. No smooth edges. She said, "Stephen, this is unreasonable. We have friends coming this weekend." I replied, "They'll need another venue," and ended the call. Daniel didn't call. He sent a message. "I never meant to hurt you, Dad. Can we talk before this gets worse?" But it was already worse. Long before the papers arrived. Long before I uninvited them from the comfort they thought was permanent. Direct hit. If your own family forgot you until they needed something, would you let them back in or would you draw the line? The movers arrived the next morning. Not mine. Theirs. I didn't watch. But the neighbors did. And I'm sure the whispers started early. A silver car pulled up. Victoria stepped out with sunglasses and silence. Daniel behind her. Holding boxes that once held their wedding china. They didn't speak to anyone. They didn't look toward my house across the street. They just moved. Quickly. Quietly. Like people who had been told a truth they never saw coming. By midday, the curtains were down. The lights off. The porch empty. My name was still on the mailbox. But now, so was my presence. Later that evening, I received a letter. Not an email. Not a message. A real letter. It was from Daniel. He wrote, "I don't know when we lost each other. I don't know if it started with Mom's passing. Or with Victoria's pressure. Or just life pulling us apart. But I'm sorry. For all of it. For the Christmas message. For the silence. For not standing up when I should have. You deserved better. Even if I never said it. You were always my compass. Even when I was drifting." I sat with that letter for a long time. It was folded carefully. Signed in his handwriting. Not typed. And still, I did not reply. Because some lessons are not taught with words. But with absence. And some love, when neglected, must be left behind. So it can be remembered. Not assumed. When I opened the front door that final morning and saw the keys sitting on the porch in a crystal bowl, her favorite kind, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt free. The house smelled like dust and lavender. Martha's scent. faint, but still there. It met me at the door like a memory I didn't know I needed. I stepped inside, and it was quiet, but not empty. The curtains had been taken down, the framed wedding photos removed, the bookshelf bare, but the structure remained. The beams, the windows, the creak in the third stair, still mine, still loyal. I walked through each room slowly, letting the silence wrap around me, not like a shroud, but like a robe, familiar, safe. This was no longer a battlefield, no longer a place where I had to defend my presence. It was my home, on my terms. I found the crystal bowl on the porch, where the keys had been left. Victoria's quiet apology perhaps, or just her way of ending things in style. I took the bowl, placed it inside the cabinet where Martha used to keep her teas. Then I sat on the old couch, closed my eyes, and breathed. Direct hit: would you take back the people who pushed you out just because they regret it later, or would you finally choose yourself? Let us know in the comments. And if Stephen's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. The days that followed were quiet. Not sad. Just still. Daniel didn't call again. Victoria didn't message. The silence wasn't cold. It was earned. I began restoring things, bit by bit. Old photo albums returned to the shelf. Martha's favorite throw placed back on the armrest. A teacup on the table. One. Just one. I walked the garden, trimmed the hedges, fed the robins. They never forgot me, and I never needed an invitation from them. That Sunday, my neighbor across the street waved, invited me for soup. Her grandchildren were visiting. She said, "We were going to have an extra seat at the table. You're welcome to it if you'd like." I smiled, kindly, warmly, and said, "Maybe next time. I have dinner to make for myself tonight." Because this time, I wasn't waiting for a message, or a knock, or permission. This time, the table was mine. And as I set the single place, lit the single candle, and opened the window to let the evening air in, I realized something. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a quiet change of keys. Have you ever walked away not in anger but in strength? Share your moment in the comments. And thank you for walking with Stephen all the way home.